Live from Liverpool, The Dark Paranormal, Season 16. Hello everyone, and welcome back to The Dark Paranormal, Season 16, Episode 8. That's right, we only have 2 more episodes of Season 16 before we take our standard 2 Friday break and then return for Season 17, rather fittingly on Friday the 13th of September. And to say we've been inundated with your experiences would genuinely be an understatement of the year, but we still want more. So, be it down to fear of ridicule or you've just not got round to doing it, take the time over the next few weeks to sit down and type out your experience. Now remember, it doesn't need to contain your name. You can be completely anonymous. The only thing we do request is that the paranormal events that take place in your experience remain as they happened. And of course, we accept submissions of any size, because if your experience doesn't fit a full episode of The Dark Paranormal, we will find a home for it, be that on a minisode or as part of one of our Dark Bites Patreon episodes. Basically, if you as a listener have took the time to sit down and write out your experience and send it in, we'll make sure that that gets put in front of our listenership. And it doesn't matter how far-fetched or unbelievable you've come to think your paranormal experience was. To use a real-world example, on our Patreon show Dark Bite, we received a submission regarding red-eyed kids. Now, I'd never heard of this at all, but I of course read it out, and I received 3 emails from different individuals around the globe, all of whom were both shocked and relieved that somebody else had experienced exactly what they were going through. So what to you maybe just sending in a simple email could validate somebody else's experience, reassuring them that their experiences took place and they are not alone. So please, take the time to write down your experience and send it over to contact@thedarkparanormal.com. Because firstly, you may experience this catharsis that our submitters seem to have when they submit their experience, and secondly, you may be helping someone you will never meet. And of course, thirdly, all of us paranormal lovers will love to hear your experiences. So that's contact@thedarkparanormal.com. In today's experience that we're about to go into, we find out what happens when a skeptic decides to try and test their skepticism. But thinking a few steps ahead, they've decided if they are proven wrong, what can they gain from this situation? Little did they know that approaching the topic with that lack of respect would be met in kind by something from the other side. But before we hear today's amazing episode, I need to of course thank our wonderful team over at Patreon. When you decide to join our team over at Patreon, not only will you receive every single episode on this feed, both ad-free and before everyone else, and that goes for the upcoming season finales and season debuts, but you can also receive exclusive access to our Patreon-only podcast, Dark Bites. Dark Bites releases each and every Sunday of the year without fail, meaning when we have that 2-week break, you will not miss an episode. Also, you will have access to the entire back catalogue of over 100 30-minute-long episodes of Dark Bites, each containing shorter experiences that didn't quite make it to the main show, merely down to length. And of course, the community at our Patreon itself is the best selling point for me. We've built a wonderful team of like-minded paranormal enthusiasts over at Patreon, and we'd love to offer an exclusive invite just to you. So head over to patreon.com/thedarkparanormal. just like the following wonderful new team members have: Bex Davies, Moby, James Rhodes, Carol Ann Douglas, Kaylee Bushner, Marie Garza, Becky Jo, Stephanie Bohannon, Alicia Walgren, Leslie Howson, Robin Willis, Sarah, Leslie, Madison GP, Renee McNally, Chris Bridges, Sean Dumont, Darren W, Guy Burke, Morgan, Stephen and Jeelan Ballard. Sincerely, thank you so much for supporting the show, guys. I could not be more appreciative. So, if early ad-free releases to everything on the feed and of course access to Dark Bites is something that you're interested in, head over to patreon.com/The Dark Paranormal. And big apologies, guys, I'm doing my best to get the intro part done within 5 minutes so we can get to the experience, but towards the end of the season when I'm asking for experiences and more people are signing up and I'm saying things like this, it takes longer to get to, so please forgive me for that. But right now, it's time. Lower the lights, make yourself comfortable, and of course, leave your disbelief at the door as we hear all about a reluctant summoner. Let me begin by saying that, unlike many of your listeners, I'm not a victim of circumstance, nor have I had an entity that's decided to latch on to my person or my home. No. This I brought entirely on myself. Belief-wise, I would have said I was a sceptic. I know people find the idea of life after death comforting, but I'd never experienced anything that couldn't be explained rationally. And although people I know have relayed their accounts to me about what they believe are spirits they've encountered, I've never challenged or argued with them. I grew up and still live in the Kent area of England. And one curious rule that my mum always laid down was that my brother and I should never use a Ouija board. Now, this did not come from any prior use on her part, nor any deep belief in the paranormal. More a mistrust of the unknown. She's more open-minded than my brother and I, but not to the extent of belief. I guess she just thought there's no point risking it. During the COVID-19 outbreak and the subsequent lockdown in 2020, I was living on my own, and I found myself very bored for most of the nights. I would work a 3 full-day week from home, and then I'd have online gaming sessions with my friends to pass the time. However, on one night in July, my friend Alex told me about their most recent paranormal experiences. They said they would see humanoid shapes walking up their stairs or passing by a doorway. It wasn't horrible screams or loud bangs and things like that, so he was never frightened of them. Anyway, this led to a discussion about our opposing views, and he suggested that if I wanted to prove it to myself, one way or the other, I should just use a Ouija board on my own. The very thought chilled me briefly. Despite my skepticism, there was a gnawing thought of, what if this is real? And it dragged itself to the forefront of my mind. I think that fear I felt was because it was drilled into me that Ouija boards are dangerous. Too dangerous to use. Then again, I decided that, as I truly didn't believe in the paranormal, I would give the paranormal world a chance to prove itself, in a very personal and intimate setting. Another train of thought always cropped up, though. When I would ponder the implications of demons or ghosts being real. Could these spirits, if real, offer me information, a prophetic insight, something I could actually use in the real world to my own advantage? The implications of this, at the time, innocent speculation, would soon become very clear. I joked with my friend that if he doesn't hear from me the next day, he'll know what happened, and I logged off earlier than normal that night to give it a go. And so I made myself a Ouija board, as carefully and accurately as I could. It was basically just a sheet of paper laying on a tray and nothing more. My front room of my flat was open plan, with the kitchen with French doors leading out onto a balcony that had curtains drawn across them. I'd read it was best to do this on the floor and to use candles as your source of light. But as my floor was carpeted and therefore not a solid surface, I decided to use a tray. Obviously, nobody wants to place a lit candle on an uneven surface. So, kneeling on the board in front of the tray with my Ouija board placed on it, I pulled out 3 tea lights and I lit them, placing one in front of me and the others either side of the board. I turned off all the lights in the flat, and it's basically now just me, sitting in front of the board, tea lights around me, and silence. Since my flat is basically on the edge of town, it was always quiet. I chuckled to myself, realizing the situation I'd found myself in was enough to give anyone the chills. If anything was going to happen, it was going to happen tonight. I had literally set the stage for it myself. I placed a light shot glass, but not light enough so it could move accidentally, on the sheet of paper on the tray, placing it as instructed over the letter G. So at about midnight, I was ready to start. I tentatively placed 2 fingers on the shot glass, and I opened the session by saying something along the lines of, "I welcome only positive energy to my side. Are there any entities that wish to speak with me?" Nothing. I repeated myself twice more. Now, at this point, I'm fully expecting the candles to start flickering, or some cold breeze to pass by my face out of nowhere. But nothing happened. Just this oppressive silence. I started feeling a bit stupid as I waited in this silence for something to happen. I'd occasionally repeat the phrase. I didn't want to give up, but I also didn't want to do anything considered provocative. So I simply changed my wording to almost extend the invitation a bit further. I welcome any spirits who wish to communicate, and to do so now. Is there anyone there? I repeated that phrase again, and I felt a shift below my fingers on the shot glass. My hand snapped back out of instinct, but to my amazement and horror, the glass kept moving, making a light scraping noise as it glided over to yes. It moved very slowly, but not consistently. It would speed up slightly and then slow down, like it was uncertain. The implications of what I'd just seen shook me. My mind began swarming with questions, theories. I fully expected to hear whispers or voices if the board had actually attracted something, but there was still no noise other than my slightly quicker, slightly louder breathing. I composed myself. I placed my trembling fingers back on the shot glass. One small movement of one small shot glass landing on one small world had just shaken the core of my entire belief system. But I wanted more. It did not go unnoticed that moments before, my request for a positive spirit got no reaction. But when I removed the word positive from my invitation, something came in. I was understandably on edge. "What are you?" I asked. As much as I wanted the experience to be as authentic as possible, I didn't want to miss anything if something did happen. So my left hand was readied over a notebook so I could write down the letters as they were spelt out. My understanding was that the shot glass should not pause unless the spirit has finished speaking, so I was also focused on trying to identify the spaces in between words. And I sat there anxiously, waiting to feel that pressure under my fingers again. But for what felt like hours, though was likely minutes, nothing happened. And then, that pressure returned. I loosened my touch, and I followed the shot glass with my fingers. I sounded out the letters as they were landed on whilst writing with the other hand. A-S-P-I-R-I-T. A spirit. The glass then stopped moving. I couldn't tell whether it was being facetious or whether it was definitely not a spirit, and trying to convince me it was. A ghost? I said. Yes. Who were you in life? I was alive. What is your name? No name. What were you called? You called to me. I paused. I wasn't really getting anywhere, and from what I'd read about other experiences with harmless spirits of the dead, they were often quite open with information. This felt almost evasive. So two thoughts wrestled inside of me. Part of me wanted to get as much information as I could from this paranormal occurrence. The other part of me wanted to say goodbye, put the Ouija board away forever, and go and lay down. I knew, however, that if I stopped now, I would not be able to build the courage to open that board again. So I decided to keep pushing. It was at this point that reality hit me. I no longer felt alone in the front room of my flat, and I shivered, despite the nighttime summer warmth. I was equal parts excited and afraid. Tell me something about myself that only I would know, I asked, unsure how personal it could get. As the glass fizzed across the board, my jaw dropped. You see, I suffer from maladaptive daydreaming, meaning I've created various intricate plot lines in my head for fictional settings and worlds as if I was there, and they would occupy my mind on long walks. This involved creating and naming characters that I would interact with, in my mind, of course. The board, in quick succession, named 3 of these characters. Characters that only exist in my mind. No context was provided by the spirit, but it knew that to me, none would be needed. I hesitated at this point, as I really didn't know what else to ask. This spirit had conclusively proven that they have knowledge beyond what should be possible. And I cannot stress enough how I expected nothing at all to happen using this board. I was genuinely caught unaware by its potency. I must have sat in silence for a full 5 minutes. I genuinely thought that using a Ouija board would be like a Q&A session. But that notion was shattered when the shot glass, my fingers not resting on it, started sliding again. I physically jumped, quickly grabbing my pen and paper and tracking it with my eyes. "You are alone," it spelt. I assumed the spirit would know already that I am. Maybe it did. Maybe it was seeing if I would lie to it. But I was far too taken aback to lie. I am, I stated with as much conviction and confidence as I could muster. Why? The pandemic, social anxiety, geographical scattered friendship groups, take your pick. Of course, I didn't say this, but the spirit was asking me why I was using a Ouija board on my own. A question that implied I'd done something wrong, or stupid, or both. Again, I wanted to be honest. I wanted to know if there was any truth in the paranormal, and this seemed like the most reliable way to find out. Curious lie. My heart skipped a beat. Lie? I asked. But ignoring my question, it asked its own, and it spelt out, truth. Why? I said I wanted to be honest, and now I felt I had very little choice. In truth, I thought that if it was real, it would open another door. Knowledge, I said out loud. Yes. I was almost excited. As I said earlier, now that I had proven to myself there was something beyond, was there any way I could benefit from this? Lottery numbers, hidden knowledge. If the spirit knew so much about me, surely it would know about other people, other things. And now is where you should understand my disclaimer from the beginning of this email. Because I wasn't using the Ouija board for the right reasons. It wasn't to contact a loved one, to seek comfort. It was to prove me right in my skepticism, or seek benefit to me if I were wrong. I understand now that I was not treating any of this with either the respect nor fear that it deserved. My selfish intentions were about to be exposed and punished. Before I could speak again, the shot glass zipped quickly between H and A. Ha, 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 as if laughing and taunting me for my naivety. At this moment, the light from the candles seemed to dim. The flames didn't go smaller, but something was almost suffocating the light, restricting their illumination. I've never had a connection to the spirit realm or anything like that, but I suddenly felt genuine, true, primal fear. The sort of feeling you have when you've been given terrible news, or seen something paralyzingly horrible. That deep sinking feeling in your stomach. You can feel the blood drain from your face and your arms and legs begin to tremble. The air became heavy, and the silence became loud, if that makes any sense at all. No ringing in my ears, but I could hear nothing. I'd never been so scared in my life. I was sick with terror. I knew it wasn't a spirit. I knew it wasn't a ghost. I knew it wasn't benign. No amount of focus could keep the shaking out of my voice this time, but I did speak slowly. You're not a spirit, are you? No. The candle in front of me was blown out, and I don't mean it flickered and died. I mean the flame bent to one side, like someone had leant down and blown. I didn't have time to react before the shot glass was moving again, this time quicker. D-E-M. I grabbed the shot glass and I yanked it down to goodbye and said the words to the effect of, I end our connection now, I break the bond. I'd read that vocalizing the end of the session would stop things from lingering, and I dived for my light switch, flicking it on and muttering, what the fuck, under my breath repeatedly for a good few minutes. The air became lighter. The candles, the two remaining ones, seemed normal. I picked up the Ouija board and the shot glass, walked to my cupboard, and threw them right to the back. My natural urge was to destroy it, tear it up, burn and shatter the glass. But apparently, doing that can free an entity from a board. There are so many rules I just didn't pay enough attention to. It felt too late, regardless of how I handled it. I put on a TV show for some background noise, but my mind was spinning. My first instinct was to call my friend, tell him how I was so wrong. I knew he probably wouldn't believe me, given how skeptical I am. or just how much had happened after one use of a Ouija board. But I needed to tell someone. Let's have a quick break to talk to you about Policy Genius. There are many things you can put off in life, and life insurance was certainly one of those things for me. I literally only got mine last year. But it turns out I'm not alone, because over 40% of people wish they got life insurance much younger than the age they did. And why don't we do it earlier? Well, you think it's all red tape and forms, but Policy Genius helps you get the life insurance you need fast, because they know you want to get on with your life. And to be perfectly honest, I have a peace of mind I did not expect by getting life insurance. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policy Genius is set up in such a way it saves you time every step of the process. It lets you compare quotes from America's top insurers, meaning it takes just a few clicks to find your lowest price. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace, giving you unbiased advice from a licensed expert support team. They also have no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. And the thousands of 5-star reviews on Trustpilot and Google, well, they kind of prove that point, so don't put off life insurance, make it easy with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quote. See how much you could save. That's policygenius.com. When I picked up my phone, though, I was reminded of the time. It was now 1:30 a.m. There's no way that ordeal could have taken that long. But it felt like it did. But I knew that it couldn't have been longer than half an hour. Somewhere in that interaction, I'd lost over an hour. I grabbed the notepad from the floor. The pages had flipped over, and in my scramble to get away, I turned to my notes and scanned down how many lines it actually spoke to me. But when I got to the bottom, I dropped the notepad, because there, scribbled at the bottom of the page, was one word: demon. The pen had been pressed so hard it tore the page. I didn't write it. The last line I had written was truth why. I hadn't needed to note down the laughing or the yes or no. I know for a fact I didn't let it spell out that word on the board. But it clearly didn't matter. I hadn't held the pen since it began its laughing, so I don't know at what point it wrote that. I would assume it happened as I hurried to end the session and turn on the lights, but I can't truly say. Moving shot glass on a spooky board is one thing. Blowing out a candle is another. But this is something definitely more tangible. Some lasting effect of what was here. It's safe to say I was no longer the same person I was even 2 hours before. I'd connected with what I was hoping was a ghost, but what was more likely, a demon. That night I slept with not just the lights on, but the TV on in the background too. I closed the front room door and the bedroom door, as if that would help. Thankfully, though, nothing happened that night, or the night after, or the night after. And I began to think I'd closed things off in time. But I was wrong. In so many true listener experiences I've heard, hauntings start off slowly. This was an exception to that rule. The layout of my flat isn't strictly necessary to understand what's going to come, so for the sake of brevity, I'll leave it out. On the following Tuesday night, I had just finished gaming with my friend again. I told him what happened before this night, and he was excited hearing about it, but something told me he didn't believe me. The experience with the Ouija board was 5 days past now, and I was still somewhat on edge. But I didn't stalk my own flat in fear at night, using my phone torch in between each light switch as I did for a few nights after. There hadn't been so much as a creaking door or flickering light so far. I stood up and stretched at the end of our gaming session. As I turned out of my computer room towards the front room, the door, open and held back with a doorstop, was ahead of me. I was in a world of my own, as you often are when you live alone, when in my periphery I saw movement. I looked up and I almost choked on my breath. About 6 feet in front of me, peering around the pinback door, I saw a face. The light in the front room was not on, so everything around me was only slightly illuminated from the light that came out of my computer room, and that light obviously didn't reach as far as the front room. I looked again. It wasn't a silhouette. It was an area of too black darkness. It looked too real. The face was sideways. I couldn't see the shoulders, but it looked as if someone was standing to the left of the door, from their point of view, and then craned their neck, uncomfortably so, to the right. Long, greasy black hair dangled down from its head. The face looked almost rotten, tinged with a dark, swampy green, with black, sunken eyes, as if there were no eyeballs, but just a deep blackness emanating thickly from its sockets, staring right at me. I felt sick. I didn't know how to react. I wanted to run, but turning my back was not an option. Neither was walking backwards to a different room. So I just stood there, like an idiot, without making a noise. The head snapped out of view, the long black hair trailing behind it. But my paralysis still gripped me. I noticed I wasn't breathing, but I didn't hear anything else. It truly felt as if this thing was waiting just behind the door in my kitchen. When I managed to break myself out of my stupor, I silently backtracked back to my bedroom. At least from in there was a way out should I need it. I turned the light on, closed the door, and called my brother as he lived nearby. I'm older than him by 3 years, and he knows I'm not a joker. So when I whispered to him that there was something in my flat, not someone, something, at my insistence, he agreed to come over. As sick as I felt, I did not want to sit down. I needed to be ready to run this time if something happened. I distinctly remember shaking out of my limbs, determined not to freeze again if something happened. I had no idea whether or not it would help, but I went to put the doorstop at this side of the door, so at least there would be some trouble to open it. As I bent down, I heard footsteps sprinting down the hall. For all talk of making a quick escape, I simply jumped backwards, landing on my ass, expecting the door to burst open, and this horrifying face to lunge at me. But nothing happened. It was like someone ran barefoot from the front room to my bedroom door and stopped dead. I found myself gripping my metal water bottle that had been laying on the floor by my bed. My knuckles were white, my eyes locked on the handle of the door. I audibly yelped in fear. It took me a second to realise it was the intercom for the front door of the flat block. But the receiver was in the hallway, beyond the door, in the darkness that something had just ran through. I put faith in the horror cliche that these things don't normally show themselves when someone else is around, and thankfully that faith was rewarded when I opened the door and nothing was there. The pale blue glow emanating from the intercom was the only thing that lit the hall as I reached for the light switch. I made a beeline for my front door, hitting the unlock the main door button on the intercom as I passed. I didn't so much as chance a glance at my front room. My brother came in, and I explained to him exactly what had happened. He's sceptical like me, so was dismissive by nature, which I actually found comforting. But he still helped me search the flat, and we could not find a single thing. But I was desperate to prove to him I wasn't making it up. I turned all the lights off, and we sat in the front room. Of course, I now didn't expect anything to happen. These things normally only appear when the experiencer is alone, right? Wrong. About 5 minutes had passed when we heard the fridge door slowly open. I looked at my brother with a "I told you so" expression. There was nobody that we could see at this time, and my brother stood up to close the fridge when a pack of ham flew out onto the draining board opposite, which was thankfully empty at the time. The back of the door was to us, so we couldn't see directly into the fridge, only the ham flying past. But multiple items were being flung from the fridge across the room and slamming into the draining board, the sink, the wall. My brother looked at me in horror. However, despite what happened earlier that evening, this pissed me off more than anything. I walked over and slammed the door back. The fridge closed with no resistance. I turned the light on and started putting the things away. I explained to him all about the Ouija board and yes, received a chastising as he'd received the same information from Mother as a child. But he also told me to tell him if anything else took place. Thankfully that night it didn't, nor the night after. But on Thursday night, this entity returned. This time I was stirred from my sleep by a smell of rotten meat. The main entrance to the block of the flats is beyond the metal grate on our balcony, just outside my bedroom window, so I do get a bit of light if somebody goes in or out. Only a soft yellow light, seeping in from the street. At this point, it was just the street light, but enough light to give a very faint outline of the objects in the room. I looked around trying to figure out what the smell might be. Did I leave food out? No. The kitchen was 2 closed doors away, and the smell was almost hot. I glanced at the corner of my room, and my heart skipped a beat. When I squinted and looked closer, once again I saw that blacker-than-black silhouette, as if it was absorbing all light. A pit in reality into which nothing existed. It was clinging to the top left corner of my bedroom. The soles of its feet were planted on the wall, and the palms of its hands were facing upwards and placed against the ceiling. Its back was facing the wall, with its front and its face aimed at me. I couldn't breathe. I cursed the bastard that decided to head out of the flat at that point, because the lights outside the main flat door flicked on, and my bedroom was illuminated further, and yes, it was the same thing. Greasy, long hair drooping down, about shoulder length, a rotten face, swampy green, and pitch black sunken eyes. It was wearing black rags, with torn and ripped sections hanging down. Feet and hands were bare. I was frozen. And then this thing began to laugh. A rasping chuckle. However, the face didn't move properly. Its cackling didn't match its facial expression. I realized I hadn't been breathing and took a gasp of air. "What do you want?" I shouted. It stopped laughing instantly.
"You let me in,"
it rasped, smiling in a sickening way. "I want you to leave," I almost whispered, so weakly it wouldn't have convinced an ant to walk away. Its grin remained.
"No."
The motion light outside flicked off at this point, and the creature was once more a silhouette. But I didn't need to see it now. I knew it was still staring at me. I could feel it. I spoke up again. "What are you?"
"A demon,"
it replied, and the silhouette head cocked to one side. "What demon?"
"Not a stupid one,"
it replied, chuckling again, flexing its arms and stretching them in weird ways as it clung to the corner. "Your spirit and soul will burn," it growled. In those exact words, like a cheap horror game dialogue. Such a cheesy line, but I'd never felt more threatened. The next thing I know, this demon's blackness begins expanding along the walls. I close my eyes, hoping it's all just a dream. I still hear this thing breathing, and then that sound stops. I risk opening my eyes, and it's leaning over me. I could feel the hair brush me. It felt wet. I threw myself out of bed, scrambled for the door, and when I pushed it open, I noticed I was alone again. The corner was empty. My bed was empty. But my body was full of adrenaline. The sheer terror and panic had took hold. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and I didn't sleep in that room. I took the only room I'd not had an encounter in, the spare room which had my computer in it. I inflated an air mattress and stayed there awake all night. After this, I'd refer to this thing as the swamp demon. When I'd be talking to my friend online or my brother, its dark skin, its wet hair, looking like it's just crawled from a swamp. The next day, I spent all day researching demons, descriptions, traits, artwork, anything to see if anything resembled this entity, and there was nothing. So, I done what my gut told me to do the very first time. I destroyed and burnt the Ouija board, the notebook, and the glass, and I got that thing out of my flat. Following this, I'm surprised to admit the occurrences did stop. Not immediately, in fact quite slowly. I'd still catch them peering around doorways, or I'd feel them watching me from a shadowed corner of a room, all of which would be enough to terrify anyone. I would switch from freezing in horror to leaping into the nearest room and slamming the door. Whenever I would catch a look at its face, it had a hateful scowl plastered on it, ever since I got rid of the board and the glass. It seemed, but didn't look, fainter, like it was getting weaker, and its appearances went from once a day to a few times a week to once a week, and then finally, within about a month, I stopped seeing it altogether. I still did have the sensation of being watched, though. My eyes do still scan the darkness for any sign of it, but there's nothing. It took me a long time to recover emotionally and get used to being comfortable sleeping. Thank you for listening to my experience, and here I will place the compulsory warning about playing with a Ouija board. More frequently than not, nothing happens. But when it does, a connection is made, and those memories will haunt you forever. Thank you so much to our anonymous submitter for this week's experience, and if ever there was an experience to put you off trying a Ouija board, I think that would be it. I think if you've done a certain amount of research into the paranormal itself, and any sort of attempting to gain something from that world, you realise very quickly you may well do so, but it will come at a cost. And very often the offer isn't positioned as an offer, it's taken as a given. So I think that's where we'll wrap up episode 8 of season 16. I'll speak to you all again on Wednesday for a minisode, and then we'll be back on Friday for our penultimate episode of this season. But until then, remember, when you're talking about the paranormal, always try and leave some of your disbelief at the door. And I'll see you next time, right here on The Dark Paranormal.